Welcome to the world Geopolitics. You've heard the headlines, peace in the Middle East, historic deal signed. But what if we told you that the real story was never about peace? The Abraham Accords were supposed to change everything. Arab nations embracing Israel, diplomacy over war, but just a few years later, the bombs are falling, the streets are burning, and the dream is collapsing. So what went wrong? Why did this once promising deal stall? And was it ever really about peace or just politics? Watch till the end to unfold the untold story of Abraham Accords and its consequences. Back in the late summer of 2020, the world watched as something truly unexpected happened. For decades, the Middle East had been defined by a deep and seemingly unbreakable division. The conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors was a constant source of tension, a story of wars and failed peace talks. Most believed that no Arab nation would ever make peace with Israel until the Palestinian question was solved. But on August 13, 2020, the United Arab Emirates and Israel, with the United States acting as a guide, announced they would normalize their relations. It was, honestly, a political earthquake. The news sent shockwaves across the globe, signaling that the old rules of Middle Eastern politics might be changing for good. This monumental announcement was named the Abraham Accords. The name itself was deeply symbolic, invoking the common ancestor shared by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The idea was to build a new future based not on ancient grievances, but on shared heritage and common interests. The promise was dazzling. It was a vision of open borders, bustling trade, shared technology, and tourists traveling freely between Tel Aviv and Dubai. For many, it felt like a new sunrise over a region long shrouded in the darkness of conflict. The agreement was less about solving old problems and more about building a new reality where those problems became less important. The official ceremony took place on a bright September day at the White House. On September 15, 2020, leaders from Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain gathered on the South Lawn to sign the historic documents. The scene was filled with hope and optimism. The leaders spoke of a new era of cooperation and prosperity, a stark contrast to the usual language of boycotts and hostility. The accords were celebrated as the most significant step toward peace in the region in over a quarter century. It was a bold bet that economic growth and a shared desire for stability could create a momentum that diplomacy alone had failed to achieve for many years. The core idea behind the accords was strategic and pragmatic. It was a recognition that the world had changed. The biggest threats and opportunities for these nations were no longer the same as they were in the 1970s. A rising Iran, the need for economic diversification away from oil, and the desire for advanced technology created a new set of priorities. The accords offered a framework for these countries to work together to face these modern challenges. In exchange for this diplomatic breakthrough, Israel agreed to put its controversial plan to annex parts of the West Bank on hold, a key concession that made the deal possible for the UAE. The Abraham Accords were not just a single handshake or a vague declaration of friendship. They were, honestly, a carefully constructed set of agreements designed to build real, tangible connections between countries that had been strangers for generations. The foundation was the Abraham Accords Declaration, a document that called for peace, dialogue, and respect among all faiths and peoples in the Middle East. It was the philosophical heart of the deal, setting a tone of religious tolerance and mutual understanding. This declaration was the umbrella under which more specific, practical agreements would be built, creating a strong architecture for this new kind of peace. Beneath this broad declaration were detailed bilateral agreements. These were the nuts and bolts of the peace deals, spelling out exactly how these nations would interact. They covered a wide range of areas, from opening embassies and establishing direct flights to collaborating on security and intelligence. There were also agreements on investment, science, technology, healthcare, and tourism. The goal was to weave the economies and societies of these countries together so tightly that their relationship would be resilient and strong. This was a peace meant to be felt not just by presidents and prime ministers, but by ordinary citizens, business owners, and innovators. Following the initial agreement with the UAE and Bahrain, other nations saw an opportunity to join this new regional alignment. Sudan joined the accords in October 2020, and Morocco followed in December of the same year. Each new member had its own unique reasons and received specific incentives from the United States. For Sudan, normalization was a path to being removed from the United States list of state sponsors of terrorism, which opened the door to much-needed international financial aid. For Morocco, the prize was American recognition of its sovereignty over the disputed territory of Western Sahara, a long-standing foreign policy goal for the kingdom. These deals showed a new transactional approach to diplomacy in the region. The United States played the role of a powerful broker, using its influence to offer incentives that made normalization an attractive proposition. This strategy was effective in expanding the circle of peace quickly. The accords were built on the belief that shared interests could create alliances, even where historical animosity had once seemed insurmountable. It was a peace built not on shared values alone but on a clear-eyed calculation of what each country could gain by setting aside old conflicts and embracing a new cooperative future. For more than half a century, a powerful idea had governed the Arab world's relationship with Israel. This was the principle of land for peace, which was crystallized in the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative. This plan, led by Saudi Arabia, offered Israel full normalization of relations with all Arab countries, but it came with a very clear condition. Israel first had to withdraw from the territories it occupied in 1967 and agree to the creation of an independent Palestinian state. This consensus held that the Palestinian issue was the central conflict, and no separate peace should be made until it was resolved. It was the unbreakable rule of Middle Eastern politics. The Abraham Accords shattered this long-standing consensus. The UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco decided not to wait for a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They chose to pursue their own national interests first, forging direct ties with Israel. This was a revolutionary shift. It effectively decoupled normalization from the Palestinian issue, signaling that some Arab states were no longer willing to let that single conflict dictate their entire foreign policy. Supporters of the accords argued this was a pragmatic move, a new way to create positive change. They believed that by building bridges with Israel, they might gain more influence to help the Palestinians in the long run. This new approach was driven by a powerful alignment of strategic interests. The most significant shared concern was the growing influence of Iran. Many Sunni Arab states and Israel viewed Iran's nuclear ambitions and its support for proxy militias across the region as a major threat to their security and stability. The accords provided a framework for these countries to cooperate on defense and intelligence, creating a quiet but strong alliance against a common adversary. This security dimension was a critical though often unspoken driver of the normalization agreements, creating a new strategic map of the Middle East. Beyond security, the economic promise was immense. The Gulf states in particular were looking to diversify their economies away from oil and become global hubs for technology, finance, and tourism. Israel, with its world-renowned Silicon Wadi tech sector, was an ideal partner. The accords unlocked billions of dollars in trade and investment, creating new opportunities for businesses in all the signatory countries. This focus on economic prosperity was a deliberate strategy to build a peace that delivered tangible benefits to ordinary people, making the new relationships more durable and popular than a simple political agreement ever could be. From the very beginning, the Abraham Accords faced significant criticism and serious challenges. The most profound problem was the one they were designed to sidestep: the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. By normalizing relations with Israel without a clear path to a Palestinian state, the accords were seen by Palestinians and their supporters as a painful betrayal. They felt abandoned by their Arab brethren, who they believed had traded away the core principle of Palestinian statehood for their own economic and strategic gains. This sense of abandonment created deep resentment and ensured that the conflict would remain a volatile and unresolved issue at the heart of the region. Another major challenge was the gap between governments and their people. The accords were largely a top-down initiative, driven by the strategic calculations of monarchs and leaders. While governments signed the deals, public opinion in the Arab world remained overwhelmingly sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Many citizens viewed normalization as a betrayal, and this sentiment was often fueled by state-controlled media suddenly promoting a positive view of Israel. This created a disconnect, where official policy was out of step with popular feeling. Without genuine public buy-in, the peace risked being a cold peace, limited to diplomatic and business elites rather than a warm friendship between societies. The political winds also shifted, both in the United States and in Israel. The Trump administration, which had made the accords a centerpiece of its foreign policy, was replaced by the Biden administration. While the new administration supported the agreements, it did not prioritize expanding them with the same vigor. It placed a renewed, though limited emphasis on the two-state solution. More importantly, Israel's own politics shifted. The rise of a hardline, right-wing government under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu led to policies that further inflamed tensions, such as the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, which directly contradicted the spirit of the Accords, and strained relations with the new Arab partners. These cracks in the foundation made the entire structure vulnerable. The peace was built on the shaky ground of shared interests among leaders, but it lacked the deep roots of popular support and a just resolution to the region's core conflict. The architects of the Accords had hoped that the benefits of cooperation would be so great that they would eventually overcome these problems. However, the unresolved Palestinian issue remained a source of constant friction, a political fault line that could erupt at any moment and threaten to undo all the progress that had been made. The question was not if it would erupt, but when. The simmering tensions finally exploded on October 7, 2023. Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza, launched a devastating surprise attack on Israel, killing around 1,200 people and taking more than 240 hostages. The scale and brutality of the assault shocked Israel and the world. In response, Israel launched a massive and relentless military campaign in the Gaza Strip. The goal was to destroy Hamas, but the war resulted in a staggering number of Palestinian casualties and a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions. The images of destruction and suffering in Gaza flooded television screens and social media across the Arab world and beyond. The war in Gaza was a firestorm that swept through the fragile landscape of the Abraham Accords. The momentum that had been building since 2020 came to a screeching halt. The optimistic talk of trade and tourism was drowned out by the sounds of war. The Arab public, already skeptical of normalization, reacted with fury and outrage at the suffering of the Palestinians. Protests erupted in cities across the region, and governments that had signed the accords found themselves in an incredibly difficult position. They were caught between their new strategic partnership with Israel and the overwhelming anger of their own people. Every signatory nation publicly condemned Israel's military actions in Gaza. The language was harsh, accusing Israel of collective punishment and violating international law. The UAE, which had the deepest ties with Israel, called for an immediate ceasefire. Bahrain's parliament announced it had halted all economic ties. Most significantly, Saudi Arabia, the biggest prize for the normalization process, officially suspended its US-brokered talks about establishing relations with Israel. The war made it politically impossible for any other Arab nation to consider joining the accords. The dream of expanding the circle of peace was frozen indefinitely. Despite the fierce public condemnations and the diplomatic chill, the accords did not officially collapse. No country formally withdrew from the agreements or closed its embassy in Israel. Behind the scenes, some security and intelligence cooperation quietly continued, driven by the persistent shared concern about Iran. However, the public-facing aspects of the accords, the tourism, the cultural exchanges, the warm celebrations of partnership, were put on ice. The war had exposed the fundamental weakness of the accords. They could not survive the political reality of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict when it erupted into open violence. As of today, in mid-2025, the Abraham Accords exist in a state of suspended animation. They are officially still in effect, but their spirit has been deeply wounded. The grand vision of a rapidly integrating and cooperative Middle East has been replaced by a much more cautious and quiet reality. The progress has not been completely reversed, but it has stalled. No new countries have joined the accords since 2020, and the enthusiastic momentum of the early years feels like a distant memory. The relationships forged by the agreements are being maintained, but largely out of the public eye, at a much lower temperature. The relationship between Israel and the UAE, the cornerstone of the accords, best illustrates this new reality. The multi-billion-dollar trade relationship continues to function, and some business and defense deals are still moving forward. For example, in 2024, plans for an Israeli defense company to open a presence in Abu Dhabi were announced. However, the warmth is gone. The once frequent public meetings between officials have become rare. The UAE has become one of Israel's sharpest critics on the international stage regarding the Gaza conflict. The partnership has become purely transactional, stripped of the hopeful rhetoric of friendship and shared destiny that once defined it. The situation with the other signatory nations is even more precarious. Bahrain and Morocco have also cooled their public engagement with Israel significantly, trying to balance their commitments with the intense pro-Palestinian sentiment among their populations. For Sudan, the normalization process has effectively collapsed for a different reason. The country has descended into a devastating civil war, and its government is in no position to pursue complex foreign policy initiatives. The agreement with Sudan, once hailed as a major breakthrough, now exists only on paper, a casualty of internal chaos as much as regional conflict. The achievements of the accords cannot be entirely dismissed. In just a few years, they generated nearly $10 billion in new trade and brought over 1 million Israeli tourists to the UAE. The Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi, a unique campus with a mosque, a church, and a synagogue standing side by side, opened in 2023 as a powerful symbol of interfaith tolerance. These are real accomplishments, yet they now seem to belong to a different era. The peace that was celebrated as a historic breakthrough is now on pause, its future uncertain, waiting for the political storms to pass. The story of the Abraham Accords offers a powerful lesson about the nature of peace in the Middle East. It shows that bold, pragmatic diplomacy can break through decades of political stagnation. The accords proved that shared interests in security and prosperity can be powerful motivators, strong enough to build new alliances where only hostility once existed. They demonstrated that some Arab nations are ready to pursue a future that is not solely defined by the conflicts of the past. This was a real and important shift. But the past has a long shadow, and the accords also revealed the limits of a peace that tries to go around, rather than through, the region's most difficult problem. The dream of a new Middle East, as envisioned in 2020, has been deferred, not destroyed. For the accords to be revived, and for their promise to be fully realized, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict cannot be ignored. The events of 2023 and 2024 made it painfully clear that a warm peace between Israel and the Arab world is impossible as long as the Palestinian issue remains a festering wound. Future progress, especially bringing in a country as important as Saudi Arabia, will almost certainly require a credible and tangible pathway to a Palestinian state. Peace between governments is not enough. It must be a peace that is seen as just and acceptable to the people of the region. What is needed now is a new kind of diplomacy, one that combines the pragmatic, interest-based approach of the accords with a genuine commitment to resolving the core conflict. This means rebuilding trust not only between governments but also between people. It requires leaders on all sides to make difficult and courageous choices. For Israel, it means acknowledging that its long-term security is tied to a just settlement with the Palestinians. For Arab nations, it means using their new lines of communication with Israel to advocate for that settlement. For the United States, it means re-engaging as a dedicated and fair broker for peace. Is there hope for real, lasting peace? Yes, but it will be difficult. The Abraham Accords opened a door that many thought was permanently locked. They showed that change is possible. The challenge now is to walk through that door and build something more durable and more inclusive. The future of the Middle East depends on finding a way to honor the dream of Abraham, a dream of a shared home for all his children. This requires not just transactional deals but a transformational vision of justice, dignity, and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Only then can a deferred dream finally become a lasting reality.